Hey, welcome to the second video in our series on building the Zephyr Apogee high power kit. And we're going to start out on step number 1 here, which is assembling the motor mount for the rocket. And first step is using an aluminum angle or door frame, draw a straight line along the length of the long engine mount tube. Now what I've gotten to use is actually, this is made by Estes. This is a marking guide, and I'm going to use this to draw a very nice straight line down the length of the motor tube. Now something I'm going to do just a little bit different, and this may complicate this step, but I think down the road it'll make things a little bit easier. I'm going to draw multiple lines on here to give me more dimensions for gluing on the rails. The reason being is I want to actually epoxy these down as opposed to just tack gluing them with the CA glue. Is it excessive? Maybe. Is it necessary? Maybe not. But I would feel better knowing that I made this as strong as possible with minimal, if any, weight gain at all. So what I'm going to do first is mark on the tube where I need to make my lines. Now what I'm going to use is the centering ring as a guide, and what I'm going to do is simply drop this over the edge, and I'm going to make 4 lines, one for each side of the 2 rails. And what that's going to do is give me a groove that I can actually then run my epoxy down inside that groove, which will give me a little bit better purchase than just a tack glue. So let me hold this steady and let me just make 4 little notches. Okay, so there's four lines that I've made. Okay, now I'm going to just take my body tube guide here, and I'm going to just line up the notches, and once I get it lined up, I'm simply going to hold pressure and draw a line. Rotate it to the next mark, and draw a line. Okay, so now I've got a groove that I can actually run my epoxy down the center of, and we'll go to the other side and do the same thing for that side. Okay, and one more. And I think subconsciously maybe I look at the instructions in this kit and go, this is way too easy of a kit to build. So I'm going to make it a little more complicated, so I'll feel like I maybe put a little more effort into it than I normally would. So with these grooves now, I've got a place I know where to align my epoxy within those grooves. Because once, and we'll get to it in a second, but when you actually glue this down, what they call for is just tacking it down with CA glue. Well, you do that, that's fine, but then I've lost the purchase ability on the underside to give me more purchase. And the same goes for the centering rings as well. One other thing that they call for is marking a 1/2 inch off the aft end of the motor. So I'm going to take a ruler and simply mark a 1/2 inch. Okay, and then additionally, I want to also be able to run a ring around the full length. They just tell you to make a notch, but I want to run a full ring around it. The reason being is because then when I glue this on, this can tend to wobble a little bit, but if I have it lined up to that ring that goes all the way around, I'll ensure a 90-degree joint. I've also got a little square here that I'll use to ensure I'm 90 degrees all the way around also. But I also want to do it on the fore end, not just the aft end. So what you want to do is measure the length of this and make a notch on this end, so I'll know where to put the epoxy for the fore centering ring. I've also got this little nifty tool from Estes, and what it does is it allows you to mark the end. So let me line this up with that first notch mark. There, like so. And then what I'll do is I'm just going to set the pencil here and rotate the tube. Oh. It's almost like you need an extra hand, two to hold and one to actually. Let's see if I can do it this way. Oh, my guide slipped on me a little bit. Let me get that back up there. And you don't want to put too much pressure pushing down, because then you're going to end up sliding that guide. There we go. So I got the 1/2 inch on the aft. Now I want to do the same to the fore end. So let me slide my little guide up. Just like so. And we'll do the same thing here. Alright, there we have it. So now I know that I'm going to run a bead of epoxy on the inside of each of these notches, which will be where these rings sit. So I've got all the markings done on the tube. So I'll set that aside. That's step 1. Now step 2 is installing our shock cord mount in the fore. And when I say fore, it's F-O-R-E, the fore centering ring, as opposed to the aft. They don't call for it, but I'm going to add some thread lock to the nut on the back side. They do say later you can add some epoxy to it, but I want to get some strength inside the threads itself. So first thing we'll do is we'll take a washer, put it on the inside. Now I've already predetermined that these centering rings align correctly with the rails as well as the 3 outer fin slots when the numbers that are stamped on it are facing in toward each other. So the part numbers. So with that, I'm going to have the numbers facing backward while I thread this in. And I've already got prepared ahead of time a 7/16 inch socket wrench. So you'll want to know that ahead of time. You're going to need a 7/16 socket. Okay, and you want to align this in that orientation, like so. Okay, and you probably want to get a deep socket wrench because a regular socket probably won't reach that far over the bolt. Now there's blue and there's red locking compound. Red is a little more permanent, which is definitely what we want because we're never going to access this again. You know what, let me put the washer on first. Okay, and then I'll add my thread lock. And I want to hold this in steady while I just tighten down on that back nut. And I'll still lay a bead of epoxy on the back side of this when I get the opportunity to. But that's definitely not going anywhere now. Let me just make sure I cinch that down. Yeah, that's not tightening anymore. So that's nice and secure. All right, so set that aside. Okay, step 4 is actually preparing the rails to slip into the slots on the centering rings here. And they ask you to sand a little rounded curve on there just to make it sliding in a little bit easier. So I'm going to start out with some 150 grit just to kind of round that. Again, this will just make things a little bit easier when it comes to assembly. In case you're wondering, what I do is I take popsicle sticks and I just glue a strip of sandpaper on the popsicle stick. Makes a great little sanding tool. And then when it wears out, you just toss it and make a new one. And do the end that's already pre-rounded. There's two ends. There's a squared off end and a rounded end. They want you to use the rounded end and sand the edges. Okay, so those are pre-sanded. That's step 4. Now step 5 is a dry run. We're not going to do any gluing yet. We're just going to do a quick dry run. So we're going to take our 4 items. We're going to need the fore-end centering ring, the aft end, and our 2 rails. Now remember, the rounded ends that we just sanded will be facing the aft end of the tube. So let's just slip this on. And we've got that marking around the 1/2 inch mark as a reference. But let's slip these in. Get the right orientation here. And then squeeze them, and then you'll just fit these into the slots on the front, just like so. Now if we measure everything, we should have the aft end right where that other mark is on the back, on the tube there, which there it is. So we got the measurements right, and we're going to rotate it so then these rails will fit within those groove lines that we drew. Like so. There we go. Make sure it looks good on the other side. And it does. So now that we know the dry fit is good, we'll go ahead and remove everything. And well, actually we can probably leave it on. I do want to remove this back centering ring though before we do any final glues. Actually, let's remove everything because I need to run my bead of epoxy. So I'm going to set everything aside, and we're going to mix up some rock epoxy. Okay, so now that that's mixed and set, we got our alcohol ready for cleanup. You can run anywhere between 50 and 90%. This just happens to be a bottle of 50% rubbing alcohol, which is fine. Okay, so we want to take our epoxy mix, and I'm going to run a bead just on the inside of our tube. And we'll make fillets later. We're not going to make our fillets now. No need to do it just yet. We just want to get that adhesion between the wood and the cardboard. So let me spread this. Doesn't need to be too thick. Okay, So that first bead being laid down, now we can go ahead and just run. Now keep in mind, we are not gluing the back end. That is not to be done yet. That'll be at the end, but we want that line still there to give us the right orientation. Now we want to align our slots up with the grooves that we've pre-drawn. So let me slide this on and then just go ahead and rotate things a little bit just to help spread the glue. Okay, there I've got one set of slots aligned with the grooves drawn on the cardboard. Okay, make sure the other side lines right up, which it does. And it's starting to rotate on me, which is to be expected because we haven't tacked anything down yet. So what I'm going to want to do is grab my thick CA and accelerant. And I'm just going to make a quick tack glue. Let that set for a second. And rotate to this side and get it lined up on that mark. And it's already setting up nicely. We've got a nice glue joint going here. Let me do a couple more tacks. So I've got each 90 degrees, I've got a tack put down. Okay. Now before I get those rails in, this would be a bad time to just maybe put a small fillet around it on the inside. We'll do the outside later, but the inside is going to be harder to get to once I get those rails laid down. Okay. Now I'll come back and clean. Actually, we can do that now. We've got a quick second here. And we got enough working time. And we can wipe off the excess that's not part of the fillet. And this is all cosmetics anyway, because no one's going to ever see this because it's on the inside. It's not like it's facing the outside where people can see. But, you know, I just like to have things nice and clean. That's me. I like to know, even though you won't see what's on the inside, I want to know that the inside's nice. And well, again, on the outside, we'll put down a nice fillet later on. All right, so now we want to get to our rails. Okay, so, but instead of putting the wood on the cardboard, I think it'd be easier to actually run the glue down the wood itself. And not a whole lot. I'll spread this spread this out. In fact, that's way more than we even need anyway. Okay, and remember, we want the round end facing aft. Now, don't forget, we're going to glue our tab in, so we need to cover the end of the tab here with epoxy as well, so it has a nice bond to the centering ring. Okay, so we're going to lay it in. And line it up on our marks that we drew. Okay. And you want to, again, tack it down in a couple spots. And again, the instructions don't even call for all this glue with the epoxy and everything. And in fact, they even say the rails may or may not provide any strength or additional assistance in holding things together. But in my opinion, they're there. Why not utilize them? So I'm going to take advantage of having them. Okay, now let's draw some fillets on this as well. Now to make things easier, I'm going to get a couple Q-tips. To help clean up. Because I want to make sure there's no glue around where that aft centering ring is going to end up. So I want to clean all this area off. And then we'll use the back ring to help align our other rail. Okay. Boy, that weight on the ring really makes it roll funny. All right. I need to remember, I don't need quite as much as I did on that first one. I was a little too liberal on that first one. Yeah, this is going to be a lot easier to work with, I think. And don't forget to cover the edges where they're going to go in the slot. Okay. Now this will be a preliminary fitting before I put that back ring on. Now this is just for fitting. We're not gluing this part on. Everything looks really good. That's fitting nice. So when it's where we want it to be, remove the ring and lay down a couple tacks. Again, this is just to hold it while the epoxy sets. Picking out some dry areas that don't have epoxy necessarily oozing out, which would be a good place to anchor a little drop of glue. Okay, so those rails aren't going anywhere. Everything looks good and straight. They're not moving now because we got that CA on it. So now let's run some fillets. We got some glue here to work with. Let's take advantage of it. Okay, so there we are. We are through step 6. Now I'm going to hold off on doing anything else until this epoxy dries. What I like to do is I always like to keep my mixed epoxy with the stick in it and just let that sit so I can test this to see if this is dry. So I'm not going to mess with this until I confirm that this is well set. Now I've got enough here. I could go ahead and lay a bead, a fillet around this end also with this glue I've got here. So let's go ahead and use this and build up a fillet around the back. So there we are. So now the hardest part is next, leaving this to dry. So we'll just let this sit overnight and we'll get back at it later. So thanks for watching.